Recently, information was leaked to the press about a mysterious signal that appears to be coming from the Proxima Centauri system. Although we are in the very early stages of investigating this signal, there are a number of things about it that make it quite unique, perhaps the most promising signal from an extraterrestrial civilization that we've received since the famous WOW signal of the 1970s. Now, the researchers at the Parkes Observatory in Australia who detected the signal cautioned that this is probably satellite interference. However, this was a narrowband signal that lasted for over 3 hours and came in at a frequency that by international agreement should not be used by satellites at all. Even more intriguing was the fact that since the signal lasted for so long, it was tracked and it appears to be moving just slightly as if it were coming from a planet orbiting the Proxima system. And we know that there are at least one, if not more, planets in the so-called Goldilocks zone of this particular star. However, it's been largely believed that since Proxima is a red dwarf star, any life on such a planet orbiting it is highly unlikely. And this is because red dwarfs tend to flare from time to time, producing a very large amount of radiation which can be harmful to the development of life. On top of that, planets that orbit red dwarfs tend to be tidally locked, in other words, one face of the planet always facing the star, which would create a very violent and inhospitable environment. However, if this signal holds up anyway, unless it repeats, the scientific community is highly unlikely to regard it as being proof of extraterrestrial life, no matter how artificial the signal may be. A signal has to repeat, and just like the WOW signal, this one has not repeated and it's unlikely to. However, since Proxima is so close, only a little over 4 light years away, there are other things that we could do proactively to confirm the origin of this signal. And what are those things? Well, I think a number of you can guess, but we're going to talk about that and quite a number of other phenomena that seem to have artificial origin, or at least have defied natural explanation, in a very unusual episode of The Angry Astronaut. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of The Angry Astronaut. A more unconventional episode. I don't talk a lot about the possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations. It's a very hot topic, one that people tend not to mention because they tend to get scoffed at pretty quickly after they bring up the subject. However, I don't have a scientific reputation to uphold. I don't tend to really care. So I'm more than happy to talk about it, especially since it wasn't that long ago that we received a mysterious signal of some kind, ostensibly from Proxima Centauri. Now, regardless of what happens with this signal, of whether it holds up or not, and this is very early information, this was leaked. The folks involved have not had a chance to submit a peer-reviewed paper on the subject, so all of this is quite preliminary. However, if it does hold up, it's still not going to be regarded by SETI as convincing, irrefutable proof of the existence of an alien civilization unless something else happens. But there's something that makes this particular signal unlike any other. And also, there have been a lot of other pieces of astronomical evidence that we have gathered since the very first WOW signal came in, that very first famous signal back in the 1970s, all of which have defied natural explanation, but have very good artificial explanations. However, a lot of these details are not very well known to the general public. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this particular episode. So let's get right down to it and not waste any more time. Now, the reason this signal is being compared with the famous WOW signal of 1977 is because number one, it was narrow beam, and number two, the frequency corresponds with what's called the hydrogen line, the frequency that things made out of hydrogen in the universe tend to emit. And since hydrogen is the most common element in the universe, it's been reasoned by SETI that extraterrestrial civilizations would send out artificial signals that correspond with this particular frequency. Now, that's not to say these two signals are at the same frequency. They're not. The WOW signal is at a frequency if something was moving toward us, that is blue shifted, whereas the recent signal is red shifted as if the object were moving away from us. However, both of them fall within the hydrogen line and what SETI regards as a hydrogen type of signal. However, every now and then, some bright-eyed scientist comes up with an idea that a comet that was recently passing through in 1977, would also have produced the WOW signal. The media invariably gets a hold of this and then releases a story saying that the WOW signal has been explained, oftentimes with some sort of snide remark about people who believe in ETs. However, comets are incapable of producing narrow-band hydrogen-type signals like the WOW signal, and this whole notion was debunked back in the 1970s, but it keeps recurring, and every time the media keeps releasing the same story, and oftentimes fails to print a retraction. Whereas comets and hydrogen clouds do produce hydrogen signals, they are neither narrow beam nor are they particularly powerful. If they were, radio astronomers would have detected this a very long time ago. As I said, this idea has been debunked for a long time, but it keeps cropping up. But to this day, the WOW signal remains the most compelling piece of evidence for the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations because all natural explanations have fallen flat. However, what few people in the general public know is that the WOW signal is not the only example of mysterious signals that we've received at the hydrogen line. There's another exciting signal which came in 2004 to the Arecibo telescope, excitingly named SHGB02+14a. Now, this signal was also at the hydrogen line and came from somewhere between the constellations of Pisces and Aries. Now, apparently there's no star system there, but once again, does intelligent life require the presence of a star system to send a signal? And also, it's a lot weaker than the WOW signal, and one thing that all these signals bear in common is they don't repeat. And SETI requires that a signal must repeat to be regarded as genuine. And yet many, including myself, regard this requirement as being absurd and hypocritical. For example, the most famous signal that we have ever sent out to a strangely distant star cluster from the Arecibo telescope, sadly on its way to the scrap heap it seems, was very powerful. However, it did not repeat. So, thousands of years from now, if some civilization picks up this signal and notices that it doesn't repeat and they have the same requirements, they will not regard it as proof of extraterrestrial life either. And by the way, signals are not the only evidence that we have of something strange going on in the universe. There are astronomical phenomena that defy natural explanation as well, foremost of which is the mysterious PRZYBYLSKI'S star. Back in the 1960s, Carl Sagan claimed that one of the best ways that an alien civilization could announce its presence, a techno-signature so to speak, would be to put a lot of plutonium or other radioactives into their sun. And lo and behold, decades later, we discovered one star, one that was absolutely loaded with unusual radioactives, including plutonium and others that have a very short half-life. It was proposed by some that this could be used as a dumping ground by an alien civilization for their fissionable materials. Perhaps they experienced a terrible nuclear war and they wanted to get rid of all the fissionables in their solar system. Or perhaps for another reason, but all of this was dismissed by the scientific community, and instead they found another explanation. It was determined that colliding neutron stars, which is a very rare occurrence, bombarding this particular star would create these kinds of fissionables. However, there are no such neutron stars in the vicinity of PRZYBYLSKI'S star, and on top of that, if this intersection or occurrence happened a long time ago, then some of the elements which have a very short half-life should be gone by now, but they're not. So this star remains quite a mystery, and if it's not being used as a dumping ground, perhaps it's being used as a warning, a civilization telling everybody else that they have a lot of thermonuclear weapons and not to cross paths with them. What might they be afraid of? And then there's perhaps the most famous of astronomical phenomena, the so-called TABBY'S star. Now, before the oddness of this star was discovered, it was thought that a clear techno-signature would happen when a star would dim in a manner that didn't correspond with a planet passing in front of it, but something strangely shaped. And TABBY'S stars seemed to fit the bill, especially when the dimming seemed to increase, as if something were under construction, something was growing around the star. However, in typical fashion, once a techno-signature was discovered, an effort was immediately made to find a natural explanation. The first explanation was a dust cloud. Now this made sense, there's oftentimes lots of dust clouds around stars. However, dust clouds also give off a lot of energy in the infrared, whereas the dimming around TABBY'S star did not give off any of this kind of radiation. Scratch that explanation. Another explanation was an immense swarm of comets. However, the number of comets required to cause this dimming would be improbable. Thousands upon thousands of them, something we have never observed anywhere in the universe. And another example, the most recent and commonly accepted, is that the star is ripping apart an exomoon. However, this would also create a massive dust cloud and the corresponding infrared, which is absent from TABBY'S star. And yet, this seems to be what is accepted, and that's about it. However, the alien megastructure theory has its problems too. Whatever's blocking out the light is semi-transparent, not blocking the light completely, as a Dyson sphere would do, for example. However, do we really know what an alien megastructure would look like, and what sort of materials that they would use in order to construct it? Up to this point, TABBY'S star is still an open question, no matter what the media might say. And by the way, if you go online, you're going to see one caption after another saying, "Sorry guys, not aliens," but the explanation has later been debunked. And then there's phenomena that science has just chosen to forget, such as a dust cloud around a forming star, a young star, which is nothing unusual that we detected in 1983. However, the dust around this forming star started to almost completely vanish in 2008. By 2009, it was almost completely gone, and by 2010, it had completely vanished. No natural explanation, absolutely none, could explain what happened to an entire solar system's worth of matter. Now, one thing that is widely regarded as a clear techno-signature is a planet slowly disappearing or asteroids vanishing as their contents are mined away by a civilization. However, the contents of an entire solar system vanishing, that would be quite an accomplishment for a very advanced civilization. And what might they want to use the matter for? Well, one of the more disturbing possibilities was suggested by one John van Neumann, who proposed that a civilization, perhaps a machine civilization, would use the matter in order to create duplicates of itself. In other words, self-duplicating spacecraft or self-duplicating life forms in the case of a machine civilization. Now, although it wouldn't make a lot of sense to make all of these Van Neumann probes, as they're called, in the same place, the idea is that the probes go out, make duplicates of themselves, and eventually occupy every star system in the galaxy, which they could do over the course of a few million years, which is a small percentage of the galaxy's total age. This raises the unsettling possibility that there could be Van Neumann probes in our own solar system keeping us under observation. Such things would be almost impossible to detect unless they announced their presence, and why should they? If they'd been watching us, they would know that we would want to capture such a thing and reverse engineer it, thus defeating its function. So it would be in its interest to stay quiet and simply watch us. Of course, this is pure speculation. But in my opinion, the most compelling piece of evidence that we have for the existence of extraterrestrial life is the first interstellar visitor to our solar system, Oumuamua. From the very beginning, we determined that Oumuamua was an unusual object, to say the least. It was shaped unlike any other object in the solar system. We thought it was a comet at first, but it wasn't, because it didn't have any outgassing when it passed close to the sun, and it didn't have any sort of cometary tail. And it was more reflective than your average asteroid. Everything about this object was different than anything we had ever detected before. And then, while it was on its way out of our solar system, while by the way having passed through the Goldilocks zone of our solar system, it did something we had never seen before. Oumuamua began to accelerate, seemingly under its own power. Now, comets do this without gassing quite frequently, but we had determined already that Oumuamua was not a comet, and an asteroid, if it had a little bit of ice that might have outgassed at that particular moment, it certainly would have evaporated while it made its close approach to the sun. The only explanation was that solar radiation was pushing the object, in which case it had to be unbelievably thin and unbelievably reflective. In other words, a light sail. Or at least this is the conclusion that Dr. Loeb at Harvard University came to. Now, to his surprise, Dr. Loeb came under attack by many of his colleagues, who instead argued that it had to be some kind of very, very flat pancake-shaped asteroids, something radically unlike anything we had ever seen before. And by the way, how something like this could pass very close to the sun and not get ripped apart by the sun's gravity is completely beyond me. But this seems to be the modus operandi of the scientific community in general. You find a techno-signature, they dismiss it and find a natural explanation that, no matter how implausible, they accept. And I'm not suggesting at all, and I want to be totally clear about this, that there is any sort of cover-up going on. Instead, it's just a paradigm shift that needs to take place where we start to accept the possibilities of other civilizations beyond our own when we see astronomical phenomena that defy natural explanation. And the reason I saved Oumuamua for last is if the Proxima signal pans out, if it turns out to be possibly a legitimate extraterrestrial signal, and we then send a signal back and receive a reply in about 8 or 9 years or so, it would be light sails that would allow us to make first contact. And it's Dr. Loeb, ironically enough, who's proposing such a thing. And this is, of course, the Breakthrough Starshot mission. The idea of using a massive laser array to propel small light sails up to the speed of about 20% that of light, and small nanoprobes located on these sails in order to give us information and pictures, to fly right through the Proxima system and see what's there. And who knows, to make this even more crazy, what if the civilization on the receiving end knew that the probes were coming? In theory, they could deploy their own laser arrays, slow the probes down, and allow them to explore the Proxima Centauri system in greater detail, exchanging information with us about their appearance, about their culture, and for the first time in human history, establishing an interstellar dialogue with another species. All of this is optimistic speculation, of course, and who knows what the Proxima signal is going to reveal. But the mere possibility that we have another civilization right in our backyard that we could reach with today's technology should make us want to look at Breakthrough Starshot and programs like it and take it very seriously. So first of all, before I go any further, I neglected in the introduction to thank Dynetics very much for this shirt, and they've sent me some other swag as well, some of which you're going to see during the course of upcoming episodes. But I really do appreciate that. Thank you, Dynetics, and looking forward to talking more about your human landing system, hopefully in the upcoming months. All right, all of that having been said, everything that I've talked about in this episode, regardless of whether or not it defies natural explanation, is not irrefutable proof of extraterrestrial civilizations. It just isn't. But at the same time, do we really need that to acknowledge the probable existence of such things? Because thus far, the scientific community, in spite of all this evidence, refuses to even acknowledge the probable existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. Instead, they talk about the remote possibility at best. Why is that the case? And I'm going to give you a really good example of something else the scientific community acknowledges pretty much as fact, without a lot of solid evidence, and that's dark matter. All we have, or the crux of the evidence that we have as far as dark matter is concerned, is the fact that there's too much gravity in the observable universe for the matter that we're able to see in the observable universe to account for all of it. Therefore, there must be something else. That's really the crux of dark matter. We haven't observed it, we haven't tested it, we haven't really acknowledged its existence. And yet, at the same time, we say that it almost definitely exists. And dark energy, which is even more dodgy, we say that that exists too. So if we see evidence in the universe of the indirect impact of what appears to be artificial, the artificial technology or extraterrestrial civilizations, can we not at least acknowledge that there's a 50-50 chance that we have an artificial intelligence involved? Where is the extraordinary proof of the Fermi paradox? Where's the extraordinary proof that out of all of the insane number, the trillions of stars and planets that exist in our universe, that we are alone? We don't have extraordinary proof of that, nor is it even required by the scientific community. And I think that that assertion needs to be held to the same standards, but it isn't. And it really pisses me off. But I hope that this particular episode has given you something to think about at least, and demonstrated to you that there's a lot in this incredible universe of ours that we have not yet explained, and could very well be explained by the fact, in my opinion, it's a fact, that we are not alone. So thank you very much for watching. You know how to support me. It's all in the description. If you want one of these starships from Spaceship Mania, make sure that you use Angry 10 and check out my merch as well. So until we're ready to have a paradigm shift as far as extraterrestrial civilizations are concerned, and if this signal holds up, until we send a signal of our own towards Proxima Centauri, which we may very well get an answer to less than a decade later. Until that monumental moment occurs, and I believe that at one point it will, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.